Part 3. The open sea stretched endlessly before them, the waves rolling gently beneath their boat as they sailed further from the safety of the shore. The wind was steady, the sky a dull shade of gray, and the air carried the familiar, salty scent of the ocean. Lars stood at the helm, gripping the tiller tightly, his eyes scanning the horizon. Svein busied himself securing their supplies, ensuring everything was in its place. Henrik sat near the bow, silent, his gaze fixed on the water, as if expecting something to rise from the depths at any moment. "You never did tell us why you hesitated," Lars finally said, breaking the silence. Henrik exhaled, running a hand over his face. "Because I know what this thing is, and I know what happens when you chase it." Svein frowned. "You saw it once, just like us. You barely escaped, just like us." Henrik shook his head. "No, I saw it twice." Both men turned to him, eyes narrowing in confusion. "You never told us that," Lars said. Henrik let out a dry chuckle. "Would you have believed me?" He sighed, staring at the sea. "The first time was years ago, when I was younger. I thought it was a storm, just some monstrous wave. But when I saw it again recently, that's when I knew. The Kraken is real, and it doesn't like being hunted." A heavy silence fell over the boat. "Then why come back?" Svein asked quietly. Henrik looked at them, his expression dark. "Because if you two are stupid enough to chase a legend, you'll need someone who knows how to survive." Lars smirked, adjusting the sail. "Then it's a good thing we brought you along." The ocean deepened in color as they ventured further from shore, the waters turning a dark, endless blue. The sun dipped behind thick clouds, and a creeping unease settled over the crew. And then, without warning, the wind changed. The sail snapped violently, the boat lurching as a gust of wind pushed them off course. The waves grew restless, slapping against the hull. The sky darkened further, heavy clouds rolling in as the first drops of rain began to fall. Svein tightened his grip on the rigging. "This feels familiar." Henrik's jaw clenched. "It's starting again." Lars glanced at the sea, his stomach twisting. The last time they had encountered a storm like this, it had been just before the Kraken appeared. The waves surged, and the wind howled as their boat was pulled further into the unknown. They had started their hunt, but now something was hunting them. The sea churned violently beneath them, waves crashing against the sides of their boat with increasing intensity. The wind roared in their ears, and the sky had turned into an angry swirl of dark clouds, flashing with distant lightning. Lars gritted his teeth, fighting to keep the boat steady. "This is exactly like last time," he shouted over the wind. Henrik crouched low, securing the supplies. "No," he said, his voice grim. "This is worse." Svein, gripping the mast for balance, scanned the horizon. There was no land in sight, only the endless, chaotic ocean stretching in every direction. His stomach tightened with unease. "Something's pulling us in?" Lars didn't respond, too focused on keeping control of the boat. But he could feel it too, an unnatural force dragging them forward, deeper into the heart of the storm. A massive wave lifted the boat high before sending it plunging down with terrifying speed. Water sprayed into their faces, soaking them to the bone. "We need to turn back," Svein shouted, his voice barely audible over the storm. Henrik grabbed him by the shoulder. "It's too late," he pointed to the water. "Look!" Lars and Svein followed his gaze, and their blood ran cold. The ocean beneath them was shifting. A dark shape moved beneath the waves, massive and indistinct, barely visible in the stormy waters. It wasn't just the waves that were pulling them in. It was something else. A monstrous force lurked beneath them, waiting. The Kraken. Lars felt his hands tremble as he gripped the tiller. "Hold on," he shouted. "We're not going down without a fight." The storm howled around them, the sea rising in fury, and then the waters exploded. A deafening roar filled the air as the ocean erupted beneath them. A monstrous shape surged from the depths, sending waves crashing in all directions. The sheer size of it defied belief. Towering tentacles, glistening with seawater, curled and uncurled like writhing serpents, reaching toward the sky before slamming back into the water with thunderous force. Lars, Svein, and Henrik clung to the boat as it was thrown about like a toy in a hurricane. The wind howled, the rain lashed at their faces, and the monstrous form of the Kraken loomed over them, barely illuminated by the flashes of lightning. Lars felt his stomach drop as a massive tentacle swept through the air, barely missing their boat. "Row! Now!" he bellowed, grabbing an oar and trying to steer them away from the beast. Svein and Henrik scrambled to help, their hands shaking. But the waves were against them. Every attempt to gain distance was thwarted by the sea itself, as if the ocean conspired with the Kraken to keep them trapped. Then the boat lurched violently. A sickening crunch echoed in the storm. One of the tentacles had struck the hull. Wood splintered, and water rushed in. Henrik cursed, grabbing onto Svein to keep from being thrown overboard. "We're not making it out of this," he shouted, his voice barely audible over the chaos. Lars's mind raced. They were outmatched. The Kraken wasn't just attacking them, it was toying with them, testing them. Then came the worst sound of all, a deep, guttural noise that vibrated through the very air around them. A sound that no creature of this world should make. The Kraken was calling. And from the depths, something answered. Another roar, this one more distant, but just as terrifying, echoed through the storm. Henrik's face went pale. There's more than one. Lars and Svein exchanged a look of sheer horror. The Kraken had never been alone. Through the raging storm and the deafening roar of the Kraken, Lars fumbled desperately for the waterproof camera strapped to his belt. His fingers, numb from the icy rain, struggled to grip it. "We need proof," he yelled over the chaos, barely able to hear his own voice. Svein, still gripping the side of the boat to keep from being thrown into the sea, turned his head sharply. "Are you insane? We need to get out of here." But Lars wasn't listening. He raised the camera with trembling hands and focused on the monstrous shape rising from the ocean. Through the lens, he saw it in full, the writhing mass of enormous tentacles, the abyssal black eyes staring back at him, and the sheer impossible scale of the beast. Click. Nothing. He checked the screen. Only darkness. "Damn it!" he cursed, adjusting the settings, hoping it was just the storm messing with the exposure. Henrik, soaked to the bone and gripping an oar, turned to see what Lars was doing. "You think it's going to let you take its picture? That thing is older than time itself. It's not meant to be captured." Lars ignored him and took another shot. Click. The screen remained empty. Then a deep vibration ran through the air, rattling their bones. The Kraken's black eyes fixated on them as if it knew what they were trying to do. The boat lurched as a massive wave, seemingly summoned by the creature, struck them hard. Lars lost his grip, the camera flew from his hands and vanished into the sea. "No!" He reached out, but it was already gone, swallowed by the abyss. Svein pulled him back before another wave could send him overboard. "Forget it. We have to survive first." Lars could barely process what had just happened. No one would ever believe them now. The Kraken had made sure of that. The storm didn't relent, and neither did the Kraken. Its massive shape loomed beneath the water, circling their small boat as if toying with them. Waves crashed against them, more ferocious with each passing minute, and Lars and Svein struggled to keep the boat steady. Henrik had fallen silent, his face pale, and his gaze never strayed far from the dark water beneath them. The air felt thick with dread. It was like the very sea had turned against them. "Henrik," Svein shouted over the roar of the storm. "What now?" Henrik shook his head. "It's not going to stop until we leave. You have to believe me now. We're in its domain." His voice, though calm, carried a deep sense of resignation. Lars, struggling to keep control of the tiller, glanced over at Henrik. "So what do we do? We're too far from shore." Henrik's eyes flicked to the horizon, where the first signs of dawn were beginning to show, albeit faintly. "We move fast," he said, his voice growing firmer. "We get out of here, now." Just then, another wave struck, more violent than before, pushing the boat off course. The Kraken's tentacles surged from the depths, massive and black, reaching for them. "Get ready," Lars shouted. "We're going for it." With a desperate burst of energy, they rowed with everything they had, each stroke feeling like it would be their last. The Kraken's tentacles whipped around them, narrowly missing. A few inches more, and they would have been dragged under. But they were determined to make it. Henrik's steely eyes never wavered, and Svein's grit kept them moving forward. "Just a little farther," Lars grunted, trying to block out the terror clawing at his mind. And then, suddenly, the Kraken's movements slowed. The monstrous creature seemed to retreat into the deep, its dark shape fading away beneath the waves. The storm, too, seemed to lose its ferocity, as if the sea itself had exhaled. "We were free?" Svein gasped, his voice barely a whisper. Lars looked back over his shoulder, expecting to see the massive tentacles closing in on them once more. But nothing. just the quiet of the ocean stretching out endlessly in all directions. We're not out of the woods yet, Henrik said grimly, his eyes scanning the horizon. But for now, we're alive. And with that, they rowed on, every minute feeling like a miracle. The boat drifted away from the chaos of the storm, the once violent waves now settling into a haunting calm. But the tension between the three men remained, as thick as the air itself. The Kraken was gone for now, but none of them could shake the feeling that something had shifted. Svein was the first to speak. It wasn't just a beast, was it? It wasn't just some giant creature of the deep. His voice carried a tremor, but his mind was clear. That thing, it's different. It's not just a sea monster. Lars, who had been steering the boat, glanced at his friend. What do you mean? His hands still gripped the oars, as though instinctively holding on to something familiar. Svein swallowed hard. That thing was smart. It knew exactly what we were doing. It followed us. It waited for us to make a mistake. It didn't act like an animal. It was calculating, thinking, even anticipating our moves. Henrik, who had been staring off into the distance, finally turned his gaze to Svein. You're right, he said softly. It wasn't just the storm or the waves that nearly destroyed us. It was that creature's mind. It wasn't just hunting us for food. It was playing with us. Lars felt a chill run through him, and his voice was strained when he responded. It was trying to get inside our heads, to make us doubt ourselves, to make us run, before it even made a move. It's like it wanted us to think we were helpless. Svein nodded, his face pale. And it succeeded. I almost thought we were going to die, but we made it out somehow. He looked down at the water beneath them. But I don't think this is over. It's not just a mindless creature, it's something else. Henrik gritted his teeth, his eyes hardening. That's why I told you, too, that we shouldn't have come back. It doesn't forget. And now that it's seen us, it knows we're not just random sailors. We've disturbed its territory. It's going to be waiting. Lars stared at Henrik, the reality of the situation sinking in. So we're just prey to it now? It's smarter than we thought. Exactly, Henrik said, his voice low and dangerous. It's not just a beast of the ocean anymore. It's something else. Something ancient, with a mind that's more dangerous than anything we can comprehend. I don't think we're the first to encounter it, and I don't think we'll be the last. Svein looked toward the horizon, where the last remnants of the storm were fading. I thought we had survived it, but now, I don't know. What if it's always watching us, even now? Lars clenched his fists, his anger and fear bubbling over. Then we'll have to be ready for it. We can't just run. It's not over until it's over. Henrik nodded gravely. You're right, but don't forget, it's not just its size that makes it terrifying. It's its mind, and that's what we have to be prepared for. The boat continued to drift on the calm sea, but in the minds of the three men, the Kraken had already cast its shadow. The monster wasn't just lurking beneath the waves. It was lurking in their minds, too. And as long as they remembered what had happened, it would never truly leave them. The days following their encounter with the Kraken felt like an uneasy silence. The ocean now stretching before them as an unwelcoming expanse. It was as though the world around them had gone into a deep, unsettling slumber. But deep down, Lars, Svein, and Henrik knew this silence was just a brief interlude, a calm before the next storm. We can't just pretend it didn't happen, Svein finally said, breaking the silence that had blanketed their small boat. He stared at the horizon, his voice almost a whisper. That thing, it's not just a creature of the deep. It's something more, and it knows we've seen it. Henrik looked over at Svein, his gaze hard. It's been hunting for much longer than we've known. This is just the beginning. Lars, who had been unusually quiet, spoke up, his voice low but firm. We don't have the luxury of pretending. Whatever it is, wherever it came from, we've now drawn its attention, and that means we have to face it. Svein nodded slowly, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. How do you face something like that? We tried to fight it off, but we were helpless. It toyed with us, made us think we were in control, and then crushed that illusion. It was toying with us like we were nothing. Henrik crossed his arms and stared out at the open water, his mind racing. That's what makes it dangerous. It's not like other predators. It's patient. It's intelligent, and it knows how to make its prey feel weak, make them doubt their instincts. Lars turned his attention to Henrik. What are you saying? You think it's still out there, watching us? It's always watching, Henrik said grimly. We only saw a glimpse of it, but I'm certain it's aware of everything we've done since we first set out. It knows us. It's been studying us. Svein shuddered at the thought. We were just a test for it then, to see if we would make it, if we would be worth its time. And now that it knows we're still alive, it won't let us go. The three of them fell into an uneasy silence, each lost in their thoughts as the boat gently rocked with the ocean's rhythm. There was no safety here, no guarantee that they would ever truly escape the Kraken's grasp. The more they thought about it, the more they realized that this wasn't just a simple encounter. It was the beginning of something far darker and more sinister. Lars spoke up, breaking the silence once again. We need to find a way to stop it. If it's as smart as we think, it's only a matter of time before it comes for us again. Henrik met his gaze, his eyes sharp. It's not about stopping it. It's about surviving it. Svein looked between them, his expression clouded with a mixture of fear and resolve. We didn't come all this way just to die at the hands or tentacles of that thing. We have to fight, even if we don't know how. The wind picked up again, a familiar chill creeping through the air as the sea seemed to shift in response to their words. The Kraken had seen them, it had studied them, and now they were marked. But there was one thing they all knew for certain. It wouldn't be easy to break free of its grip. And the next time they faced it, it would be ready. The open sea stretched before them, vast and endless, but to them it now felt like a vast predatory wilderness. And they were the prey. Let's prepare, Henrik said, his voice low and determined. It's not over, and when it comes for us again, we'll be ready. Lars and Svein nodded in agreement, their fear now tempered by the cold edge of determination. They would survive, if only because they had no other choice. The days that followed were filled with a strange quiet. The men had prepared themselves for another encounter with the Kraken, but as time passed, they began to realize something unsettling. The creature had vanished. The seas were unnervingly calm, with no sign of the massive beast that had haunted their dreams. Lars, Svein, and Henrik spent their time scanning the horizon, each one lost in thought, their minds preoccupied with the memories of the creature they had faced. The Kraken had been real, and they had seen it with their own eyes. Yet now, it seemed as though it had simply disappeared, leaving behind nothing but a lingering sense of unease. I don't like this, Svein muttered one evening as he sat on the edge of the boat, staring out at the horizon. It's too quiet. It feels like it's still out there, watching us. Henrik nodded, his eyes narrowed as he searched the endless expanse of water. It's like it's waiting. But waiting for what? Lars, who had been pacing back and forth, stopped suddenly. Maybe it's gone, he said quietly. Maybe it's not coming back. Svein shook his head. I don't believe that. After everything we've been through, it just disappears? No, it's still here somewhere, and it's biding its time. But despite Svein's words, the days continued to pass with no sign of the Kraken. The ocean remained calm, and the trio began to wonder if they had truly imagined the terror that had once gripped them. Each night, as they lay in their cramped boat, the silence was deafening. The Kraken had become a ghost, an impossible legend that had somehow found its way into their lives. But now, it seemed like that nightmare was slipping away, like the last remnants of a dream fading into the dawn. Henrik was the first to speak up after several days of silence. What if it's not just a creature of the sea? He said thoughtfully. What if it's something more, something that knows when to appear and when to disappear, something that is tied to the very nature of this place? Lars and Svein looked at him in confusion. What are you saying? Lars asked. I'm saying that maybe the Kraken isn't just an animal, Henrik continued. Maybe it's a force, something that doesn't just live in the ocean. Maybe it can sense when people are close when they're searching for it. And maybe, once it's seen what it wanted to see, it retreats, waiting for the next time it's needed. Svein frowned. So you think it's been watching us the whole time? Just waiting for us to figure it out? Henrik shrugged. I don't know. I can't explain it, but it feels like it's not over. Not yet. Despite Henrik's unsettling thoughts, the days dragged on with no sign of the Kraken. The sea remained calm, and the men began to wonder if the creature had indeed vanished, leaving only a trail of unanswered questions in its wake. One evening, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, Lars stood up and stretched. I think we need to head back. We've been out here long enough. Maybe it's time to put this behind us. Svein nodded reluctantly. I agree. We've seen enough. We've faced the Kraken, but if it's not coming back, maybe it's time to go home. Henrik hesitated, his eyes still scanning the water. You're right. It's probably gone for now, but we should never forget what we saw out there. There are things in this world that we can't explain, things that we'll never fully understand. With heavy hearts, the three men began to steer their boat back toward the shore. The Kraken, for now, was a distant memory, a legend brought to life and then snuffed out just as quickly as it had appeared. As they neared the shore, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the water. The island they had left behind seemed smaller now, almost insignificant compared to the vastness of the ocean that stretched out before them. Lars looked at Svein and Henrik. We've made it through. We survived. And that's enough. Svein clapped him on the back. You're right. We've seen things most people wouldn't believe, and we've lived to tell the tale. Henrik smiled faintly. But the Kraken? It's not gone. It's still out there, watching, waiting. The three of them fell silent as they made their way back to the village. The Kraken might have vanished for now, but its presence would linger in their memories forever, and who knew? Perhaps one day they would meet it again. But for now, they were just three men who had faced the impossible and survived. Back in the village, the trio made their way to the familiar local bar, seeking warmth and a moment to rest their weary bodies. It had been a long journey, and they were eager for a drink and some respite. As they entered, the dimly lit room felt comforting, with the soft hum of conversation filling the air. The bartender, an old friend who had seen them come and go over the years, waved them over. You lads look like you've been to hell and back, he chuckled, wiping down the bar. What'll it be? Lars ordered a round of beers for the group, and they took a seat in the corner. The fire crackled in the hearth, its warmth adding to the coziness of the room. But despite the comfort of being home, their minds were still preoccupied with what they had witnessed on the open sea. Do you think it's really gone? Svein asked, leaning back in his chair. That Kraken we saw. Could it have been something else? Something we'll never fully understand? Henrik stared into his glass, swirling the contents absent-mindedly. I don't know. I still can't shake the feeling that it's not over. But I also think we've seen enough to know that it's not just some mythical creature. It's something far more intelligent, something with purpose. Lars nodded, his thoughts echoing Henrik's. We never even got a chance to understand it. We were so focused on survival, we missed the bigger picture. As they talked, a man sitting at the bar, who had been eavesdropping on their conversation, leaned over with a sly grin. His weathered face was rough from years of sea exposure, and his eyes glinted with a strange knowledge. He had clearly overheard their talk about the Kraken. You three don't know half of it, the man said in a raspy voice, his accent thick and foreign. That thing you saw? It's no ordinary beast, and I'll bet you didn't understand what you were dealing with. Svein looked up, skeptical. What do you mean? The man leaned in closer, lowering his voice. I've heard stories about that creature, seen it once or twice myself. It's not just some mindless animal roaming the deep. No, it's much more than that. Henrik raised an eyebrow, intrigued but cautious. What are you saying? That Kraken's got a mind of its own? The man nodded slowly, as if confirming something long believed. I've been on the sea longer than most, seen things that most wouldn't believe. And I can tell you this. The Kraken's intelligence is beyond anything you've ever encountered. It's not just a creature of instinct. It watches, it learns, and it adapts. Lars frowned, his mind racing. What do you mean, adapts? Are you saying it's like it's aware of us? The man chuckled darkly, taking a long pull from his mug. More than aware, my friend. It knows what you're thinking before you even do. It knows when to show itself, when to hide, and when to strike. It's been around for centuries, perhaps longer, and it's got a purpose. You don't just stumble across the Kraken. It chooses who it reveals itself to. Svein leaned forward, unable to hide his curiosity. But why? What does it want from us? The man's face darkened as he glanced around the bar, ensuring no one else was listening. That's the real question, isn't it? What does it want? I've heard whispers from old sailors long before your time. Some say it's a protector of the seas, others believe it's a harbinger of something worse. But I think it's something else entirely, something that has a reason for everything it does. Henrik's eyes narrowed. You've seen it? The Kraken? The man nodded, his expression somber. Aye. And it wasn't the first time, but each time it's different. It's like it's learning, adapting, becoming something more. It's not just a beast anymore. It's something more intelligent than anything we can comprehend. Lars exchanged a glance with Svein. Their hearts raced at the thought of what they had experienced. Could it really have been that intelligent? The Kraken had never seemed like a mindless beast. It had always purposeful. But hearing this man's words, their unease grew. How do you know all this? Svein asked, his voice low. The man smirked, his eyes gleaming. I've been hunting it for years, tracking it, and I've seen things most men would never live to speak of. The Kraken has been following me for a long time, ever since I first set sail up abruptly, his face serious. We've seen enough. We've survived it. I don't want to know any more about this creature. It's best we forget. But the man's voice stopped them. You think you've escaped it? You haven't. Once the Kraken has set its eyes on you, it doesn't just let go. It'll follow you, watch you, wait for the right moment. The three friends fell silent, the weight of the man's words settling heavily on them. No matter how far they traveled, no matter where they went, the Kraken would always be out there, watching, waiting, and perhaps they had merely scratched the surface of something much larger than they could ever understand. As they left the bar that night, the wind picked up, and the distant sound of the waves crashing against the shore seemed to carry a new weight, a reminder of the creature they had faced, and the mystery that still loomed. The Kraken was out there, and it knew them. Years passed, and the days of chasing legends seemed distant, like a fog slowly lifting with the rising sun. Lars, Svein, and Henrik continued their lives, returning to the familiar routine of fishing, though their horizons had shrunk. They no longer ventured far from shore, and the deep waters that once called to them seemed less inviting, less certain. They had grown older, wiser perhaps, though the weight of what they had encountered still lingered in the back of their minds. The Kraken, once an omnipresent terror, became a story, something to be shared quietly over a drink, a tale to keep the younger generation guessing. They told it with a sense of finality, as though they had lived through something that only the sea could understand. But as much as they still talked about it, there was something unmistakable in their eyes, a kind of reluctant acceptance. The Kraken had been a chapter of their lives, a strange and terrifying encounter that they never truly understood. It had left them with questions that no one could answer. Their days on the water grew quieter, their conversations lighter. They still fished, still laughed, still worked together as they had before, but the adventure, the uncertainty of the open sea, was gone. The storm, the creature, the pursuit of the unknown, all of it seemed like another lifetime. And so, they spent their days in peace, fishing in the waters they knew best. The Kraken, however, was never far from their thoughts. Occasionally, the sound of the waves crashing against the rocks would bring a fleeting memory of the giant creature that had once towered over them. But the Kraken never came back. And with each passing year, the sharp fear they had once felt slowly dulled into something more like awe, an understanding that some things were simply beyond human comprehension. They never saw the Kraken again. And in the end, perhaps that was the greatest mystery of all. The sea remained as wild and untamable as ever, but Lars, Svein, and Henrik knew now that some legends were not meant to be fully understood. Some creatures were meant to stay hidden in the depths, their secrets buried beneath the waves. They had lived to tell the tale, and so they did. The end. Subscribe to the channel if you want more stories.